The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to The Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couturi, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Winemakers. I'm John Myers, and I'm sitting here with Brian Casey and Bart Hansen and Sam Couturi, and our special guest today, Dr. Kimberly Nicholas, PhD. She's the author of Under the Sky We Make, and she's an associate professor of sustainability science at the Lund University, the highest ranked university in Sweden.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you in Sonoma.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Sonoma Native.
Right. Norbom Road native.
Norbom
Road native.
We didn't do the secret handshake. But
I know. Well, you didn't want anybody to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, you're Hale Road, right? Do you your parents' the address is Norbom Road? Hale
no.
Road is like just a private thing.
Hale emerged somehow, and I don't approve.
Fair
I feel
enough.
it should be.
Also,
normal.
you don't stop at the stop sign at High Road, do you?
Oh, do you think I'm a monster?
She's not going to say that publicly.
I slow down significantly. If there's a car coming, I definitely stop.
The stop sign was installed after you got your driver's license. It doesn't count.
Retroactive.
You know?
The road. My husband is terrified by how everyone in my family drives that road. Yes.
Totally. 100%.
Yeah, fairly.
I think anyone who doesn't live on the road is terrified by people that drive on the road, on Trinity, on Moon Mountain.
And you can drive faster at night.
Oh, God.
Right, because the lights will help.
Right, you can see
tell the deer to go away.
Further away.
Well, Kimberly, welcome. This all started, I don't remember where I read about the book, but I ended up getting a copy of it. And it wasn't until I started reading that I actually realized that you were from Sonoma. And so immediately I was like, oh my gosh, we have to get her on the podcast somehow. We've gone back and forth a number of times. You were always great offering to do it on Zoom. This was coming after we had done the podcast for over a year on Zoom.
We have Zoom PTSD.
You were zoomed out. Okay.
Yeah.
I get
There's
it.
something about tasting wine with somebody somewhere else and like trying to have the same experience. It just doesn't work. I mean, people were great. We had great interviews. We had great opportunities, people that we got to talk with, but this is so much better. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you.
I don't even know where to start. There's so much stuff, but I think what struck me the most about your book is that the science is all there. I'll let you tell that story, but I was struck by how practical you made it and how you convinced me that we all have to start doing something. We have to do little incremental things to get started. We have to encourage more other people to do things. And if we don't, excuse my French, but we're screwed. And it's interesting. I saw the 60 Minutes last week talking about animals dying, and stuff. And the one doctor from Stanford, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. Everybody knows why that is. But he said, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, Petaluma's Petaluma.
Right. I know. It's certainly not Norbom Road.
Urbane and cultured.
Yes.
No, I think one person in this room got all the smarts that were on Norbom Road and the rest of us didn't.
Sorry. This is a perfect opportunity for me to get this out and change the microphone to somebody else. Was that the planet will be fine. It's just how we exist on the planet is what's going to change. And what we have taken our entire lives and our generations before us entire lives as being normal is not going to be normal anymore. And that's frightening. So anyway, welcome to the Winemakers Podcast. I don't really want to talk so much about how climate change is affecting the wine industry. I want to try to empower people to do something in their own communities, and spread the word, maybe sell a few books. And that's not to sell books for you. That's because it's a real practical handbook, I think. even if you only read the it's too long list in the back.
Too long didn't read. That was my mom's idea. Read. There's bullet points at the end. Yeah, you can start there.
So anyway, tell us how you came to having climate be what you focused your life on.
Yeah, well, thank you for those really kind words about the book. And you get an A. It was an excellent summary. I really appreciate that. And I'm so glad you found it practical. I mean, a lot of the climate work that I do is rooted in having grown up here and having a family in agriculture. My grandparents and my dad were in the turkey business, and my parents have had a vineyard for a really long time.
That's
right.
Is that Nicholas?
Okay.
That's the Nicholas.
And I think maybe it was probably you that sent it. And you did a good job in social media when the book was just coming out. And I'm like, oh, I know some people with that last name, but they're not in Sweden.
No. I've gotten pretty far afield now. Yeah. But
no, it is, you know, the heritage and legacy of your family and turkey business in Sonoma Valley. And now that, you know, those farms are still agriculture, it's now grapes, is super important to, I think, this conversation. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone in this room obviously cares about wine, has a deep connection to the Sonoma Valley and the area that we call home, which is so beautiful and produces such spectacular wine and food, and as a place to live, it's just incredible. I mean, being here is such a gift, and it really is an animating force for me, because so I did my PhD about wine and how the wine industry was being affected already in around 2004, I guess I started, or even, 2003, I started my PhD focused on wine. And, you know, then it felt more hypothetical and more in the future. And I remember one grower telling me, you know, I don't want to talk about climate change in a decade or 100 years. I want to know what the weather's doing next week. So it was much more short-term thinking. And I see a big change now. I mean, I think people are really have experienced how our climate has changed and is changing, and there's so much at stake. I mean, we are alive at such a critical time for the planet, and I really care about wine. I have heard it's possible to exist without wine. So, I mean, there are other things that are at stake with climate change, like being able to feed everyone and have a good life for everyone.
Air to breathe.
Yeah, clean water.
Water to drink.
Pretty important, you know.
Wine is on that list, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Happy Dryuary for all you who celebrate, I guess.
I did that last year. And I got COVID, and I was like, correlation, causation, I don't know.
Same thing happened to me.
Okay. Yeah. It's probably not scientific, but yeah, I didn't do it.
Don't tell my wife that.
It's science-ish.
Okay.
Well, and I think that 15 years ago or 20, you know, when you were starting this, we as the wine community and you know, your parents included, hadn't felt the effects of climate change literally on our doorsteps. And I know, I mean, you know, people were on this, but I think 2017, and I bring it up because I know that, you know, your parents were evacuated in the same way that our, you know, home was evacuated.
I think you were digging fire lines up there, right?
I get a lot of credit for posting on social media about fire lines being dug. You know,
I was so grateful for that.
Sam was kind of like Marlon Perkins, you know. He was waiting the safety of the valley floor while his brother was
I was up there a couple times, but not nearly as much as some people who have actual skills and useful abilities.
But the posting was also a really valuable lifeline for me, being far away and being so scared and worried and having no idea what's going on, and just the scale of the crisis was so huge, and people can't be everywhere at once. So I was grateful for your posting.
Well, Sam, and maybe that's yes.
Do you still have one of the books from the art museum
somewhere around here?
You should give her one.
Yeah, I will.
All his tweets are in there and stuff.
Oh, wow.
I wrote
very
it in
fascinating.
into
really
like
good.
a essay story sort of thing.
Oh, I would love to read that.
But I mean, I think that we are all there. You know, to your point, you were reading those 7,000 miles away, however far away Sweden is that we all are actively being affected by these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a worldwide problem, and we need our communications around the world more than ever to get this thing done, but it has to be rooted in your own community. And it has to be started in your own community. Yeah. Kimberly, I think maybe it would be a good thing for you to maybe, because there are probably people listening that don't know about climate change, really. They don't understand maybe the carbon footprint, just a few basic things to help people understand what we're going to talk about.
Sure.
Remedial Climate 101.
Yeah. It's almost, what you need to know fits almost in a haiku if you don't count it that carefully. So if we really boil it down, what the science tells us is it's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, we can fix it. And there's tens of thousands of peer-reviewed studies. There are hundreds of scientific societies. There is just absolute certainty and overwhelming agreement on these key points. So if you want to dive deeper into the science, it's wonderful, and I certainly encourage you to do that. If you want to roll up your sleeves and get to work, you can feel confident doing that because you have the science behind you.
And how long has... this is a leading question. How long have we known that there's going to be a problem? And we know that there were studies done a long time ago. There were speeches made, and then there were changes in attitudes to people that learned those things. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yes. I mean, this is one of the really painful truths of the climate crisis, is that we've had the science in place for a really long time, and it's been not just, not clear scientifically, because there has been, of course, evolution of the science that's been very important to have the certainty that we do now, but active disinformation and misinformation campaigns by major fossil fuel companies and others. And that's really set us back by decades. And that is just so infuriating and heartbreaking, because those are decades we cannot get back. They make our job a lot tougher now. And there's just so much more that needs to happen so quickly that could have been a lot simpler and cheaper and easier to do gradually. And we just don't have that time anymore.
What has made the difference now that people are becoming aware?
The funny thing is, if you look at the data, so the best data on this for the U.S. comes from the Yale Center for Climate Communication. And they've done more than 20 years of really robust surveys of the American public, and including something called Climate Change in the American Mind, where they look at different demographic groups, of which there are 6, and look at how people relate to climate change. And a couple things are true at the same time. One is that it's a near historic peak in the number of Americans who are concerned or alarmed about climate change. That's the majority of Americans, somewhere around 2/3 to almost 3/4. So it's a really big number. One problem is that the very small group, less than 10%, who are called dismissives, who deny or aren't aware, don't actively sort of deny that there is a climate problem, that the earth is warming because humans are burning fossil fuels, and that we can and should do something about it to stop it. That group is really loud, and some of them are in Congress, and some of them are in really powerful political and in positions in industry, and they have a huge amount of influence over the public debate. So that's been slowing things down. But I think what's been building momentum is social movements is one thing, NGOs, so civil society groups who are organizing and building grassroots power, people in local communities. There's a wonderful group called We Are Talking About It over in Healdsburg that started with a couple friends, and they table at the farmers market and get people involved in their community. They're going to... Oh, great. I love those people. That's really awesome.
That's April. April Nall is part of that group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Friend of the pod.
Oh, great.
Recent guest.
Oh, great.
The last year of our show and before, but we really focused a lot of, not every episode, but we had some really great guests who were talking about things that were happening within the wine industry, with climate in mind and climate crisis in mind. And I think the important piece of your work, and a lot of the stuff that I see on social media, is sort of addressing the existential dread piece of it, and that like we can have all the reusable wine bottles that don't weigh very much that we could possibly have, and all drive hybrids and electric cars, but that doesn't change the fact, like the big corporate burning of fossil fuels that are this piece of it that it seems so daunting and unsurmountable. But a lot of what you do is sort of working through those feelings that so many people have, that there isn't that we can fix it piece of your haiku. So will you talk a little bit about that, sort of just the psychological piece of it, but how effective these little changes that we can all make on a daily basis really can be?
Yeah, I think that's so important.
That was a big question. Sorry, there's a lot there.
We can go there. That's okay. I think it's great. So what I've come to is to focus on linking facts, feelings, and action. And I really think we need all three. So the facts are in that haiku. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's all the world's governments have endorsed that, by the way. The facts are there. But the facts don't speak for themselves. They don't automatically translate into policy and behavior change. And to do that, we do need to address the feelings. And you mentioned existential dread, which is a very common and honestly normal and healthy response to the scope of the crisis. I mean, if you're evacuating your family home, it is real. I mean, and I think there are thankfully getting more and more resources to deal with that and to acknowledge that and make space for that. And I've found that the best way out, or really the only way out, is through. That you have to go in what I call these 5 steps of radical climate acceptance. Go from ignorance, not knowing about the problem, avoidance, sticking our heads in the sand. And that isn't just, actively dismissing or denying the reality of climate change, but just not incorporating it in our everyday lives. Many people have a wake-up moment and go straight to doom, which is the 3rd step. And that's often a late-night Google rabbit hole of darkness. Maybe we've all been there. I
Start
certainly
digging
have.
the hole in the backyard for the shelter.
The bunkers, yeah.
The prepping begins.
Yeah.
Stockpiling beans. Yeah. We're going to have Steve Stando from Rancho Gordo on sometime this month.
Ooh, love Rancho Gordo.
Nicely done, Sam.
Yes to more beans, climate-friendly protein, all about it. But, digging the bunker in the backyard and preparing to get through emergencies and help our neighbors and help each other. Very good idea. But, yeah, digging the hole in the backyard, probably a sign of doom. So to get beyond that, that's not the end. And to get through that, you have to go through all the climate feels. And that's the 4th stage, which is anger at the injustice that this is happening. I mean, there's so many innocent people, young people, poor people, people in marginal communities around the world who've done so little, if anything, to cause the problem and are suffering the most. So anger is very natural. Grief at losing things that we love and care about. And there are things that have been lost or will be lost. Doom and dread are certainly a part of it. Other feelings include courage, community, being energized by the scope of the work that needs to be done. And ultimately, what those feelings can be used for is to help us find our purpose in creating meaning through doing climate work. And I really believe that doing what is needed for the climate can be an incredible pathway to finding meaning, to building community, to feeling really useful in the world, to be of service to the people and places that we care about, and to make our lives matter. And we just happen to be the most important people who have ever lived, because we are this last generation, these last few years of our carbon budget. It's the amount of fossil fuels, basically, that we can burn and without causing catastrophic climate change. And we just have a few years left of that. So we are the ones who have to make radical changes happen. And as you said, that can start, and I really believe must start, in our daily lives with our everyday choices.
I mean, 2030, right? That's the line that's the sand line in the sand.
Yes. And where that number comes from is that if globally, humanity has not succeeded at our critical goal, which is to cut our carbon pollution in half by 2030, then there's basically no way to avoid warming more than 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial baseline. And that might sound kind of abstract, but that's a huge, huge shift. I mean, that would be something like the difference in average temperature between Napa and Fresno, to put it in grape terms. That's a really big difference. And we definitely feel that in our everyday lives, in the seasons, in the plants and animals that are able to make a living where we live, the crops that we're able to grow. So beyond that, things get really, really tough and really scary.
How confident are you that we can achieve that?
Well, we're not on track to do it now. And the title of a UN report this year was The Closing Window. So that was the words from a February 2022 report from the United Nations Climate Panel, that we have a rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for humanity. So it's on the line. It is possible, but every month that goes by that we're not engaging, that we're not doing something, it becomes less possible. So it's really now or never. And I mean, even I guess I worry about this a lot, because we're really clearly, I mean, right now the world is headed for something like, more close to 3 degrees of global warming. And that's really scary. But the more we get away from that, the better life will be. And even if we don't make these really, really critical and important targets, getting on track, doing what's needed now, changing the curve, leaving fossil fuels in the ground, getting onto clean energy, doing things that make us healthier and happier along the way is just the right thing to do, and will give us so many more options.
What do you must get so frustrated. I get frustrated because some of the numbers that we've talked about, you've heard these things for 20 years. And what a lot of people don't understand is why people in power don't affect change. And is it that you just have these select individuals that are making tons of money, and they have lobbyists, and they're able to change laws or not change laws, and guide the agenda? Because that we have intelligent people, caring people that are actually in positions of power. And so why is it not possible to somehow create this global awareness of, hey, we need to change things, and even sort of like a benevolent dictator, someone just saying, okay, you know what, enough is enough. Like, these things need to get done. I just, and then I wonder, these people that are profiting from fossil fuels, what is their plan? Ultimately, like, do they not have family? Do they know of some alien invasion coming up and they have a seat on the ship that's taking off to Mars? Or it just, common sense, there's no thread of common sense in any of the arguments. And so it's really frustrating. And I think a lot of people feel that. And so they get to the point of just sort of throwing their hands up. And if it's not going to affect me tomorrow, and there's always other things going on in your life, people are busy, and so then it just sort of kicks the can down the road another day. Yeah. But it's almost like we need some leader to just come out and say, okay, guys, I'm picking up the ball, I'm carrying it, you guys are all coming with me, it's gonna be a better planet, we just need to make it happen. But who is that person, and why haven't they shown up? And if they're not going to show up, then I can not use plastic in my house, and I can, drive an electric car, but it just doesn't seem like it's moving the needle enough to actually make a difference. So I just don't, it's so incomprehensible sometimes that the science has been out there for so long, but there's no one really, it doesn't feel to us as normal people that have 9-to-5 jobs and watch television at night that there's anyone really directing the agenda. It's based on us actually having to find a community and then get involved in that community. But I don't know if it's laziness on my part, but I just wish that there was someone besides Greta Thunberg or someone that was out there inspiring people to do something. And you know what?
Getting child traffickers arrested by their pizza boxes.
Or, maybe we're going to have to make less money this year, honey, because we're going to have to volunteer some time to do something. I mean, there's so what is it? I want to know from your perspective, like, what do you think these people are thinking? Yeah. And that involves people in Congress. Yeah. What is the end game?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I share your frustration, and I definitely see many examples of it. What the research says is that politicians don't feel enough support from their constituents to take bolder climate action. The ones that are concerned and alarmed, like the majority of Americans, hear a lot from lobbyists that want to keep the status quo, and they do not hear a lot from their everyday constituents. And they are afraid of losing their job if they move too quickly and too boldly. Now, that's not to excuse them. I think people in power have a huge responsibility that they've largely been failing. I mean, I agree with you that we don't have a lot of powerful climate leaders, especially in politics at the highest levels, who are doing what's necessary. That said, I think there have been huge wins in the U.S. And I mean, it's an interesting position for me because Sweden just had an election in September 2022. We now have a right-wing government in power who has kind of given up on our climate goals and publicly said, I mean, we have a climate law that says, for example, we'll have net zero emissions by 2045. And the current environment minister has kind of shrugged and said, well, if we don't meet it, we don't meet it. It's like, wait a minute, this is the law. Your job is to keep the promises that you've made, which have been put into law. And you're a lawmaker who's responsible for delivering this. So it's very concerning there. But in the US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, which is the biggest climate legislation ever passed. It is on track to reduce emissions about 40% by 2030. We need to do more. It's not enough, but it's a huge step in the right direction. So actually, now I think in the US, there's huge opportunities. There's a lot of incentives, and a lot of the work that needs to be done is helping communities to access those incentives, to know what they are and how to put them into practice. And I think, to your question of how do fossil fuel execs sleep at night? I honestly don't know.
Xanax and Ambien. Seriously.
Maybe wine. Oh my gosh, what if you're, unknowingly helping to support these? No. I asked that question. I asked that question to Ben Franta, who studies climate denial. And what he said is that the research with, for example, cigarette executives showed that they have a narrative in their mind that they're the good guys. So there aren't many people out there who are like, you know what, I'm just a jerk. I don't care about people. I don't care about my kids and grandkids or anybody else's. I'm just in it to make as much money as possible. Those people must exist, but really they're not they're not the rule. They'd be the exception. And in the case of cigarettes, the people were saying, so the line from the cigarette company was, smoking cigarettes does not cause cancer. And the execs were able to believe that was true because of how they had defined those words. For example, it's not true that everyone who smokes cigarettes will get cancer. It's not true that everyone who has cancer has it because they smoke cigarettes. Yeah. And they had a narrative in their head that meant that what they were saying was then true and acceptable. And I think what's happening with the fossil execs who are still, there's less overt denial. Like, I was looking back, the first study that I was a part of when I was a grad student at Stanford was published in 2004. And it was carried in the New York Times, reprinted there. And it's really stunning to see how media, even, not that long ago, well, we're all getting older, but, 2004 was representing climate, that it was, here's this team of 17 scientists from top universities publishing in this high-ranked peer-reviewed journal. It's been extensively, tested, and this is as close to the truth as we can get it. And here's what it looks like for climate change California. And then, presented as equal to that was this hack from industry think tank, basically saying, oh, this is just alarmism trying to scare people. And those two things were presented as if they had equal weight. So that has at least shifted. You don't read that in the New York Times or other, major media anymore, but there's still, so far to go. And I guess to your question of where's the climate messiah going to come from?
Fascist. Bring it.
I mean, the problem is I think we need democracy to solve climate in a way that makes a world that I want to live in. And that means we have 5 climate leaders sitting around this table who have different abilities, but all of which are needed to actually engage and start making a difference. I truly don't believe in this kind of top-down like leadership. I mean, I think the moment for that has passed. It could have been possible, but personally, I don't see it being the way forward. And I really believe in the more bottom-up, which, you know, in some ways is a lot harder and demands a lot more of us, but also is a lot more meaningful, and there's a lot more we can do.
Kimberly, today in the New York Times,
Kimberly,
doctor. Today in the New York Times, in the climate forward section, your climate actions in 2023. So this is addressing the U.S., and our conversation has been basically talking about the U.S. What impact is Beijing and Mumbai and Moscow having on the global climate change scene?
So to stop climate change, humans have to completely stop adding carbon pollution to the atmosphere. We have to get to 0. And that means we have to completely stop burning fossil fuels. So putting that in perspective makes us realize that every country is really important because all countries have to do that. It's been agreed, for example, in the Paris Agreement and the United Nations process that rich developed countries who have already benefited a lot from fossil fuels and who have high emissions need to reduce first and fastest out of fairness, basically. But all countries are going to have to go to 0. The U.S. has an especially important role historically because we're 5% of the global population and we're 25% of total climate pollution.
Wow.
Yeah.
How's the other 75% broken up?
So China, as you know, is a much bigger country than the U.S., much, much larger, more than 3 or close to 4 times the population. They've caused about half as much climate pollution in total as the U.S. So per person is much lower.
Really? I mean, when the Olympics were there and it was fogged up with smog and pollution, I mean, you could see it on television. It was crazy. They mounted fans in the mountains to blow it off. I mean, it was really silly, but I mean, I would think that they were even worse than we are. That was my concept at the.
But I don't think all what you're talking about is not all just smog and pollution, right? It's everything else in the world that we do. You know, it's how things are produced. It's the difference between recycling glass and
right
and reusing glass.
Well, and I see news showing rivers in the east that are just completely clogged with plastic. You know, soda bottles. That's
right.
it, and milk bottles. That's
So those numbers, the 25% of climate pollution coming from the US and 12% total coming from China, that's climate pollution, largely from burning fossil fuels. But that's really closely correlated to all kinds of industrial pollution. And the reason that pollution in general is so much more visible in China is that CO2 itself is invisible. The greenhouse gas that warms the climate from burning fossil fuels, we can't see it. And the US in the 70s, I mean, we probably all remember, used to have much worse air quality than it does now. So regulation has been successful in decreasing the visible smog and particulates that you can see with your eyes. And you might remember, I mean, I remember looking from my parents' house who live, so we both grew up on a road a couple miles north of here with a view towards the south in San Francisco. And it used to be a lot browner on the horizon. And it has gotten
LA
here.
climate inversion, you know?
So I think definitely all countries need to get off of fossil fuels as fast and fairly as possible. Countries like China and India are no exception. But the difference is that in India, there are 400 million people without access to electricity. They don't have a refrigerator. They don't have air conditioning. They don't have a light for kids to study and read by at night. So there's still development that needs to happen there. And I think the U.S. and other rich countries have a responsibility to make sure that development is affordable and clean and not locking in more of the pollution that we went through and adding to the problem.
Are we the number one then
China is now the number one climate polluter per year in terms of total volume. Again, per capita, they're smaller than the U.S. still, but China became the largest about 15 years ago. So that's quite recent. The U.S. got a really big head start.
Yeah.
We were pretty wild in the 70s, weren't we? Boomer.
Can we talk about food supply or diet?
Yeah.
Because I think that's one thing that people can sort of relate to in an everyday way. And what's the difference between me eating some beef and me eating some chicken and me eating some fish or me becoming a vegan?
Well, and also to that point is, and then how much does how the beef or the chicken or anything is raised? Is that, if you say I'm not eating those products that are coming from forests being mowed down in Brazil and it's grown regeneratively here in the United States and it's not trucked all over or flown all over the world, is that making a difference?
I think Michael Pollan has a really good rule of thumb, which is eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So, I mean, that's a good guiding principle. We know from research that it is much better for the climate to eat plants instead of animals. And that's actually true regardless of how either the plants or the animals are raised. Yeah. There's just such an enormous difference in things that grow from the ground and eat sunlight for food, basically, or use sunlight to make their own food, which is what plants do. Then things level up on the food chain like us who can't do that and have to eat the plants that are able to. So there's just a huge, tenfold or more loss in energy every step you go up the food chain. So there was a study that showed we could feed more than 10 billion people with the food produced today if people just ate all the food that was produced and we didn't feed that food to animals and to our cars, basically, to turn into biofuel. So a largely plant-based diet is really the best for the climate, also for biodiversity, because animals use a lot of land and water. Now, that said, there are systems that make sense to have animals be a part of it. And grazing animals, for example, in lands that benefit from grazing and doing that in a responsible way does make sense. No matter how you cut it, it's going to be a lot less meat consumption than the average American today. But what there's room for in a healthy and sustainable diet is about 2 servings of eggs, chicken, and fish per week. 1 serving of dairy per day, which is either about a glass of milk or a serving of cheese, which is only 1 ounce. It's the size of your thumb. I wish it were bigger because I love cheese. And then a couple of beef burgers per month. So it's a modest amount of meat, but for people who want to include meat in their diet, there is room to do that in a healthy way. And I mean, growing up here, I definitely believe in supporting local farmers, people who raise animals with good welfare and responsibly. That said, from a climate perspective, how the animals are raised doesn't make as big of a difference or how they're transported. Those are usually quite a small part of the total footprint. And
I kind of want to talk about an attitude of lesser evils that goes on with a lot of people in my family and people that I know, where we don't want to drive a car that uses fossil fuels, so we're driving an electric car, and then we find out that we're mining cobalt in Africa that's killing people. So then there's an argument against electric cars. Then it starts an argument there. We want to use wind power, but all of a sudden a couple birds a day fly into the turbine, and then you have a group that raises their voices, and next thing you know, it's coal
doesn't kill hawks, right?
Right. But this is always the thing, is that there's no perfect thing. That there's but it just always seems to be the lesser of the evils. But you get these groups that stand up and raise their voice, and then people get involved, and next thing you know, their voices end up being louder because they're passionate about that particular thing.
Well, so one thing I hear you saying is that a small group of passionate citizens can make a really big difference. Interesting point there.
True. Right.
But also, I mean, to your point, let's just talk about what the high impact actions are. So, and I like to think of it in 5 different areas. It's not just what we do as consumers, but also as citizens, as role models, as professionals, and as investors. But starting with consumption, sort of our everyday life, how we spend our money and time. The highest impact actions we can do there are to go flight, car, and meat free.
And talk about flight, because I didn't realize, everyone thinks that driving cars around is the worst thing that we're doing. And then, when I found out that flight was actually really bad, and then you look at the news from this past Christmas season and you see all the flights and all the,
revenge travel, right?
Oh my
People,
God.
like, busting out. Yeah, it's a worrisome trend. So if you fly, that is your biggest source of climate pollution. And that was definitely true for me. So I'm a former frequent flyer. In 2010, I moved from the US to Sweden. And that year I took 15 round trip flights, which is a lot.
Between the US and Sweden?
No.
Just in general? Okay.
Yes, it was, I think, 2 that year between US and Sweden. But others, I went to Disneyland with a friend. I went to a wedding on the East Coast. I went to a concert in Germany when I moved to Sweden. So it was just a really normal thing for me personally to, but to buy a concert ticket to my favorite band, which was playing, 1,000 miles away or whatever.
Which is what band?
Who's the band?
That was Arcade Fire.
Thank you.
Before they won the Grammy, I was like really into them. Yeah. Concert was amazing. But, I should have waited till they came to me because flying is just so carbon intensive. I mean, you can blow. So what we need to be aiming for to stabilize the climate is a footprint per person of about 2.5 tons per year. And a single flight can blow that. So we really, 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 and unfortunately, there aren't technical solutions to continuing to fly the way we do in a climate-friendly way. An electric car is substantially better than a gas-powered car, and it's getting better as the grid gets cleaner. So as more electricity comes from clean sources instead of fossil fuels. But right now in Sweden, for example, it's about 65% better, the life cycle impact of driving an electric car than a fossil car. And there are impacts for mining, and it's not a completely free lunch, but definitely from a climate perspective, it's the way to go.
Have you ever thought about creating some sort of scorecard? Because people love to keep score. So when you just said 2.5, what would tell me what it would be if...
So our carbon budget per person, we should be aiming for around 2.5 tons per person per year.
Right.
That's our goal.
So if you had an app or a chart on my refrigerator where I could make little, every time I did something,
how do you
how much carbon
calculate
did you
it?
burn
Right.
today?
and give people a goal to sort of shoot for, let's try and stay under that number.
Or something that or at least something that they can understand how they're using it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are some good resources out there. I'll name a few, and then I am working on one, which I can talk more about. So the average American today is around 15 tons per person per year. Oh, damn. So yeah, oops, right.
Sorry.
And the average, I focus a lot on this global top 10%, which is in the US, you just have to make about $35,000 a year or more. So certainly most people who can afford to live in the Sonoma Valley are in that group. And we collectively, this top 10% that I'm also a part of, cause half of the global climate pollution. So that's why individual action is so important along with government and industry action, because we are holding the key to actually a really globally significant amount of climate pollution. If you get up to the top 1%, which is $109,000 US per year in income, that makes you globally in the top 1%. And that group is about 50 times over there, or 25 times, about 50 tons a year, 25 times over their budget. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in eliminating unnecessary flying, for example, in driving less. Those are the things that actually add up the most, because especially as income goes up, so climate pollution goes up with income. Basically, what people do with income is turn it into travel. I mean, that's a large part of travel and stuff. Yeah. But travel actually has a way bigger footprint than stuff. And especially for this top 10 and particularly top 1%, about 60% of the top 1%'s climate pollution is from travel. from flying, 40% from flying, 20% from driving. So any
Great.
flight or driving you can cut is a big climate action.
Yeah. Well, and a great argument for VR. I mean, if you can get people with Oculus on their heads and they can go around the world, get off the plane.
Totally. And an argument for building routes where you are for trains, for slower travel, for active travel, for taking, maybe we could normalize having one huge lifetime vacation that takes a year, then you get to explore the world rather than many short, frequent, long distance flights. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this.
Yeah.
How do you track your usage, these tons?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you track them daily? What am I doing that causes it?
I need a scorecard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If you want a scorecard, I recommend the Cool Climate Calculator, which is from UC Berkeley. It's a carbon calculator, of which there are many, but it's the one that's been through peer review, is the most academically robust.
I'm sitting here thinking we're going to Copenhagen this summer for vacation. And and we're thinking we'll ride bikes and we're gonna go see. Do you know what the Copen Hill is?
Oh yeah, I've hiked it. Yeah, because
Okay.
that's about 45 minutes from where I live now.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, we were gonna come over to Sweden.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking like, God, what is our carbon input to go? Our footprint to go to Copenhagen?
Yeah.
For
So
a week?
can I ask about offsets then? And you say we have a 15 ton per person. Is there the possibility of doing things that reduce the total carbon and bring it's a net 2.5 tons per year or a total 2.5 tons per year?
Planting a tree.
Like if you're flying to Copenhagen for, flying to Europe for your summer vacation, is there a way of offsetting that carbon impact some other way, either financially or physically, planting trees, whatever? Or is that just sort of like makes you feel like you're doing something but actually doesn't do anything?
Fucked up corporate game.
Yeah, totally.
It is. I've seen that game being played before, and
wet lips.
yeah, it's
But I mean, the offsets things, there's the carbon offset on like on the macro scale, but on the, if you had a prime rib for Christmas, can you,
Say
have
4 Hail Marys and be climate
a living
absolved.
Christmas tree, right? Is that, I mean,
Yep, I hear you.
Are those trade-offs? Is that a fallacy? Is that a red herring, or is there reality there?
Unfortunately, offsets do not work. There are trade-offs we can make, and the way that I think about it, and we can talk more about why offsets don't work. I write a monthly publication called We Can Fix It, and a couple months ago the issue was called Climate Neutral or Carbon Neutral is a Bad Goal. And there I go into the evidence on why offsets have not worked historically and why I don't think they're a productive way to go forward. What I have personally done and what I advocate doing is reduce our own footprint, my own footprint, as much as possible. So in my case, I went from taking those 15 flights a year to now 1 flight a year. And I haven't been able to or willing to give up this 1 flight that's between Sweden, where I live and work, and Sonoma, where my family is. And that's a dilemma I created for myself by moving halfway around the world in 2010, when I really wasn't thinking about the carbon and climate constraints that we face in the same way I am now. So Kim in 2023 would not move to Sweden because I'm locking myself into these love miles, they're called, which are the hardest ones to cut. But that said, I have reduced my flying more than 90%. I have gone car free in Sweden. I'm not in California or in Sonoma where we live. It's quite difficult.
Spend your entire vacation here walking back up the hill.
Walking up and down the hill, right.
I mean, there's a reason I might buy an e-bike.
Oh yeah, that's a great
Get
option.
up and down the hill.
Yeah.
That would be great. And the research shows, I mean, when they substitute car trips, which if you own them, they do, that the shared e-bikes, unfortunately, have not been successful in displacing car trips, but the own e-bikes do. And that's awesome. And you're outside and you're getting exercise. And yeah, it's a big win.
And we live somewhere where you can ride your bike most of the year.
Yeah, right. So bottom line, I think of it this way. Look at your footprint to get a sense of, is my footprint above the average for my country? If no, it's not, it might be tough for you to cut much more, because then you're kind of a lot of your footprint is coming from infrastructure that you don't have direct control over. But if you're 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times above the average for your country, you have a lot of room to make personal changes that can make a big difference. When you've done that, go as far as you can and be progressive about it, set goals. I mean, the way I started flying less was I said, okay, I'm going to follow the example of my friend Charlie. I'm going to stop flying within Europe. That's something I can do. And that led to a really big decrease in my flying overall. It was nice for me to have a simple rule. Once you've reduced as much as you can, in your own footprint and consumption, put your climate energy into those other 4 roles as a citizen. So as a citizen, as a role model, as an investor, and as a professional. And that's where you can, for example, take your money out of, I used to bank here at Bank of America. They're one of the major funders of expanding fossil drilling and infrastructure, even though we have no more time and space in the carbon budget to do that. So I took my money out of Bank of America. I put it in Redwood Credit Union, which is the whole credit union idea is these local community-based nonprofits that reinvest in the community and do not support fossil expansion. So spend your time doing that instead. Set up a monthly recurring donation to support groups that are working for climate action. Professionally, the kind of work you're doing, getting the word out, encouraging the wine industry to make the changes that are needed. That's where you can direct a lot of that energy, and don't worry about the offsets.
Just because I'm not on that plane doesn't mean that plane's not flying, though, right? So, and I'm not saying...
I don't know. You're a businessman, right?
There.
Don't you sell wine?
Yes.
So do you believe in supply and demand?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's the same with that plane. It really does matter.
Right.
I mean, that specific particular plane might not be canceled because you didn't buy a ticket on it. But if it flies anyway and you don't buy a ticket, you're certainly not responsible for those emissions. And the airline industry is one of the most responsive to demand. They change schedules and flights all the time. Right. So changes in demand do decrease the flights.
Cool.
What countries in the world do you see having the best success in changing attitudes, besides having women in power? I imagine it's probably a big factor.
Yeah.
And why?
So move to New Zealand,
right?
To sail there, though.
Cool. Okay, I want to come.
There's your year vacation too.
Right.
That sounds awesome. Oh my gosh.
No more love miles.
Stock the hull with wine and take off. That sounds amazing.
Your
What an
performance
adventure.
gets better the more you drink.
And I know it's not apples to apples because we're a larger country.
Yeah.
With our infrastructure and how systems are set in place already. But what countries are doing well, and what is it they're doing?
Yeah, well, there's a range. I mean, if we look, and you're absolutely right, the research shows that electing women is a very effective climate action, that it's statistically significantly related to reducing carbon pollution. So we haven't talked too much about the citizen actions yet. Those are super important. The most important there that we can do as individuals is to vote. There's groups like the League of Conservation Voters and others that assess politicians and give them a climate score. And studies have shown that voting for politicians with a strong climate score also reduces pollution. Yeah. So that's a really big one. And there's a number of initiatives now. I just heard about one called the Down Ballot Climate Initiative. I think I have that name right. So supporting local races around the country of the people who are, deciding where are the bike lanes going to go? Are we going to have, replace parking with bike infrastructure? Are we going to do these kind of everyday climate action that actually makes a big difference for somebody deciding, hey, I'm going to leave the car at home and take the e-bike into work? So there are a lot of places we can engage. But sorry, I feel like I forgot
I'm just
your question.
wondering what other countries that are doing much better in reversing carbon footprint. And
is there anybody doing much better?
Well, in like California, I think that California probably does a better job than a lot of the other states. And I know we probably catch a lot of shit for it. But I've noticed
or do
now
we
that
just feel like we're doing better.
Well,
California's better. California's better.
But I've noticed in my 50 years on this planet that we make changes here in California. Other people make fun of us, and then just wait 10 years, and then they are all doing those things that they were making fun of us for doing.
And we need those leaders. So there are a handful of countries, it's around 20 countries roughly, who do have emissions going in the right directions, down towards zero. they're all going too slowly. They all need to speed up. But there are countries that are doing it. The U.S. is one of them, actually. So emissions are now declining in the U.S. So it's mostly wealthy Western countries. It's the U.S., Sweden is another, much of Northern Europe. I think New Zealand is also declining, if I have that right. There, it feels like it's more of a demographic transition that sort of regulations come into place basically to start chipping away at the pollution, whereas rapidly growing and developing countries are still building infrastructure, and unfortunately too much of it still fossil-based, where their pollution's going up. A real bright spot is cities, because there are more than 300 cities that have emissions going down. And there's a network that was originally called C40 cities, which was meant to be 40 cities who are taking climate action, that now has more than 300 who are actually succeeding at reducing emissions. So I think city climate action is really, really important. And as you mentioned, California has long been an environmental leader. Vehicle standards, for example, have been really important in California in pushing the whole market, because so many people live here. It's burdensome for auto manufacturers to make different kinds of cars. They just end up making cleaner cars that they can sell in California, and the rest of the country benefits from that.
Yeah.
I just ran myself through the cool climate calculator.
Okay.
I am a climate villain. 12.4 tons of CO2
Okay.
for me.
Okay.
But you're also below average.
That's true.
And I really try.
Yeah.
Don't justify him.
Well, no, I mean, I do.
I appreciate
I
the
have my
honesty, yeah.
boomer guilt, but I do try. We try.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Right.
that's it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so you are below the U.S. average, although you might, I don't know off the top of my head what the California average is. You might be a little bit above that. I think
I'm from Chicago, so.
Okay. you bring it with you. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And what
Make
did
that
it
adjustment.
say?
Unfortunately.
Don't you get a graph that says what proportion of the total comes from each activity? Did you see where's your highest emissions from?
I didn't go past that. I can go show
Gotta
me
give your
what I'm
email
doing
address for
well, you know.
yeah.
Since your property was built after the year 2000, its energy consumption is 15 to 30% less than average.
Okay.
I have lowered my electric bills 50%
Wow.
from 2 years ago.
Wow.
My water 50% from 2 years ago.
Wow, that's a lot. And on a really short time. So what did you do to achieve that?
Turn things off.
Uh-huh.
Pee a bunch of times before I flush. I don't have a yard, so it's all mulch. So I don't water my yard.
Okay.
I do think about it. I mean, we recycle religiously. We compost. We don't buy bottled water anymore and single-use plastics.
Yeah.
I don't go to the grocery store. I see people at the grocery store, at the produce, just tearing off 10 or 12 plastic bags that are one-use bags. That's it.
Yeah.
And I use paper bags to do that. They call them mushroom bags, but they're, I just go get them, and I put everything in that. I really do try. Our family tries.
Yeah.
And my son, at 33, blames me. Absolutely.
Wow.
As a boomer for everything that has gone on.
Wow.
We have two cars, one is a 2000, one is a 2015. So one is more efficient and cleaner than the other.
Right.
But my wife won't give her car up. So it's not going to happen.
Okay.
But all kinds of things I'm trying to do. I don't know
I hear
where
that.
to improve myself other than not driving. I haven't flown in a couple of years, but my wife does international business. So she's in Europe a couple times a year. So
Right.
her flight is much worse than mine.
Right.
So.
Well, it does sound like you're doing a lot. And I think, in terms of footprint, reducing your own consumption, you've already hit on the big ones, which would be reduce the driving as much as you can. Maybe you keep the two cars you have, but if an e-bike might be an option, you try to replace the shorter trips. The most climate pollution comes from long trips. So that's both for driving and for flying. It's easier to replace the shorter trips with, for example, if you were going to drive a mile or two, maybe that's a really easy e-bike trip. And that's great. Every time you can leave the car at home is super. But the biggest pollution comes from if you're doing a long distance trip to, a destination across the country or many hours away. And the same with flying. So something, for example, if your wife could look into would be, is it an option to stay longer and make one trip combining all of those instead of two. That'd be a way to cut her climate pollution in half from flying.
I need Brian's scorecard.
Oh, yeah.
I need to figure out how to do it.
But John, I think what's key is that you have awareness. So like a lot of people just aren't even aware or care. They wouldn't care what their score was. But it seems like you're thinking about it on a daily basis. And I have a 14-year-old daughter. And so what I love about these kids coming up is they're vigilant and they're willing to change their lives significantly to make positive changes. Whereas I'm older and like have routines. But I love this new generation coming up, these kids, because they see a goal and they want to go for it and they're willing to make changes that I think a lot of other people aren't.
Well, the research shows that daughters are really effective at changing their dad's concern about climate specifically. Yeah. And I think that's really important because I also think it's really energizing and incredible to see young people so engaged. Nonetheless, given that we have, it's now 2023, 7 years, the carbon clock is ticking. We can't make it their responsibility to cut carbon in half in the next 7 years, right? Those of us who have the possibility and power to do that are the ones who need to get those changes going, inspired by and in collaboration with young people. Right. But it's not going to work to be like, great, they're going to fix it. Or, right. Oh, once the young people rule the world, everything will be fine. It's like, no, they're inheriting the world we're creating right now.
Yeah, I mean, my son has definitely given me he considers anyone, whether we always joke about the boomers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he considers my generation has ruined it also. And I try to explain to him it's been generations for, before, but his school, they talk about it. And I think that it sounds like the part of the problem is that nobody's talked about it for years. So how important is it that schools start teaching climate education to you?
Really important. I mean, this is one of those 5 high impact roles that we can have for climate action as a role model. And that's how we talk about climate to others. And I would put education under that category as well. That said, I recently found a paper digging through old stuff in my parents' house. I wrote a paper in 1990, so I was 12 years old, where I said, cutting down the Amazon rainforest to grow beef is releasing carbon dioxide and causing climate change, as is burning fossil fuels. In the next century, this will be a problem because temperatures will rise, there will be more droughts, impacts on crops, health, I was 12, and my sources were the Sonoma Valley Public Library, bless them, huge resource, and the magazines that came to my parents' house. So I cited Good Housekeeping magazine as one of my sources in this paper. So
I don't think you get away with that anymore.
It's not in the book. I have about 700 sources in the book. Good Housekeeping is not one of them. No, but these really available resources, and there was no internet. I wasn't Googling anything, but the information has been out there a long time, and it's super important that it's part of everyday conversations, it's part of education. But the reason it's important is because basically behavior is there's a trigger, a thought, an action, and a consequence. And the trigger could be, okay, now we're together in this context, we're having a conversation about climate in this podcast, or you're at a party with a friend or discussing with your kids. The thought is, about responsibility or about what we can do. And then the action is triggered by the thought, and that's affected by how we talk about it. So it's really important to have the conversations, to make the space for conversations. I mean, I think it sounds very painful to be blamed by your children for what they feel is a really difficult future.
He blames everything on me.
Yeah, but that's really tough, right? I mean,
yeah.
What are those conversations like?
Oh, I mean, usually they're pretty short-winded conversations. They haven't gotten. I mean, he's a 15-year-old boy. He's not a
right. He'd have to talk more to have a full conversation.
I mean, he likes to throw things out there and move on and go, shoot baskets or play his video game.
Okay.
So he's not quite there yet, but he's getting better. I mean, it's the other thing is the how he is around us and compared to, all the things that we hear from his teachers and whatnot. Like there's much more thoughtful and process things for school, the papers that he writes, stuff like that.
Right.
But conversations with us is about controlling the narrative.
Yeah, well, that's tough. I can certainly understand with a teenager, but I wonder what would happen if you asked, well, what would you like us to do about it? I mean, I wonder what his, what is it that specifically is bothering him? Because obviously the entire state of the world.
I will ask him that.
Yeah, and I wonder if there is an activity that you could do together that would be a creek cleanup in Sonoma, or a getting e-bikes into the hands of people.
Well, I mean, on that note, I mean, we do have those conversations, and we do community pickups. We pick up buzz balls off of Grove Street. Still there, guys.
That's a reference to a recent episode,
right? But no, I mean, we do have those
on the side of the road.
Right.
Oh, okay, great.
It also is disgusting malt liquor.
15% alcohol malt liquor.
Wow, that's the name of a drink, Buzzball?
Yeah.
Okay.
They come in, they're literally like plastic balls that you buy at the convenience store.
Oh, wow.
And you
get a buzz off.
Peel the top off of them and drink them, and then obviously apparently throw them out the window on Grove Street in front of Bart's house. Or maybe up the hill from Bart's house, and they roll down and flow down in the rainstorms.
Oh, America, what will you invent next? Look at this technological solution to how to get drunk as fast as possible.
Drink wine in cans instead. Come on. It's recyclable.
Right.
We've come full circle.
There's only some slight self-interest in saying that.
Oh, well, let's talk about things we can do. What do you think? What do you think are what's low hanging fruit? What's the easiest things for people to change their everyday lives?
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about them. I mean, many people start by what we've talked a lot about here is the consumption role, and that's every flight and drive and meat consumption that you can reduce makes a huge difference. Yeah. Then there's also the political role. So voting, super important, supporting groups with your time and money that are working for climate action, electing women, which we talked about. At the professional level, we haven't talked too much about that, but there's a huge role that the wine industry can play and is playing, and many are coming together to do that. I mean, most of us spend the majority of our days at work, and we don't need everybody to quit their job and run out and become a climate activist. What we need is for everybody to make their job a climate job, and to make happen basically the things that are within your power to do at work. There's a great guide from Project Drawdown called Climate Solutions at Work that is a 2-page checklist for basically if you're in human resources or you're in procurement or you're in these different roles, what is it that you can do? And I've written a lot about what the wine industry, both consumers and producers, can be doing, which is a huge amount.
Can we talk more about that specific? Just, A, from the consumer side, but B, we've talked about it a lot in, previous episodes, but maybe sort of just like hit the bullet points again for people who, are coming to this as this, didn't catch those episodes, or just to sort of reiterate and expand on, we've talked a little bit about bottles. We've talked a little bit about, some things here and there, recycling and, reusing lighter bottles, things like that.
Yeah, less plastic. Figure out ways to have less plastic.
If the quick hits.
Sure.
So, across the wine industry, both from the consumer and the production side.
Right. So the packaging conversation is important for producers. That ends up being about 1/3 roughly of the carbon footprint. So there's everything from what happens in the vineyard to, being efficient, minimal soil disturbance, reducing the inputs as much as possible, efficiency in the winery in terms of water and energy. The transport is really a big one. So I've been talking to a lot of people about how they're approaching that creatively. Some of it is options for local refills, for example, so reusable bottles rather than recyclable, because glass is energy intensive to move around. It's heavy, right? And to make it, you have to melt sand to 3,000 degrees. That takes a lot of energy. So reusing glass would be great if you're sticking with glass. Lighter packaging in general, because that's less weight to transport, and that correlates with emissions. Those are a couple things from the wine industry. And I think there's really important work happening by groups like International Wineries for Climate Action that have taken leadership, are being really transparent about their numbers, making it easier for others to follow, making it easier for others to follow suit. And, where I think we met at the Snappa Thrives event recently this past summer, there were some great talks where people have crunched all the numbers, and there's a pretty consistent pattern. So if you don't have, if you're a small winery, for example, and you don't have the resources to do a big inventory, you can rely on, okay, these are going to be the high impact actions because this is what others have done. And a big thing there is that it's also about the supply chain, right? It's about setting standards, for example, and making agreements and having the industry as a whole move in a big direction. Because one big learning from that session for me was that, Molly from Spotswood was sharing that about 20% of their total emissions come from essentially on farm or on winery production that they can control directly. Right. And about 80% come from their supply chain, things that they purchase. So that's their packaging, that's transport. So a lot of that is, they can influence. And then a lot of it is having those conversations with partners and suppliers and industry organizations and moving in the right direction together.
And what about farming?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people say to me, talk about organics, and they say, well, the problem with organics is that you need more passes with a tractor. That's an aesthetic thing. I mean, Sam, you should be talking about this more than me, but I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is organic or regenerative farming in the wine industry specifically, is it impactful? I mean, it makes us feel good. It makes us feel like we're protecting the planet. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've been working on regenerative viticulture and supervised a master's thesis at Harvard, actually, Jessica Villatte. So the thesis is online and we're working on a publication from it now. What she did was look at all the studies that have been done in wine growing. And I mean, when we talk about regenerative, there are many different understandings of that word, but one really important one is we need to be increasing carbon in the soil. That's one thing that we're regenerating. So instead of releasing carbon from the soil to the atmosphere where it's a pollutant, we're capturing more of it from the atmosphere. We're using the magic of plants who take carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it in their roots and leaves, and building that cycle so that the carbon is going up in the soil where it does lots of wonderful things for soil structure and function and is a good thing instead of a problem in the air. So basically what we found from that study was that there were 9 practices that have been understood as regenerative. All of them did increase carbon compared with a standard industrial practice. There actually was no statistically significant difference between any of the 9 practices. So basically, all of them were good and did something. There haven't been enough studies with enough statistical power to say this is absolutely the best or this is the worst. But things like incorporating animals in the vineyard, using cover crops, those did make a difference and increase carbon. And I think farmers, people who are growing grapes, have this experience of what works to improve their soil, basically. But it would be really nice to have more solid numbers and priorities, because the one important aspect of it is we would like to know, what is the most efficient and what's worth investing in, or, how do you prioritize your time and equipment and labor in the vineyard so that you have the biggest benefit. And I don't think we have a clear answer to that yet, but it is promising, and it does work basically to do these regenerative practices.
I mean, increasing carbon in your soil has the same effect financially, really, as turning the heat down in your house and using more efficient lights cuts your energy bill in half. The carbon in your soil is your bank. Putting more carbon in your soil, or building soil carbon, makes your plants grow better. So it's, there's a bunch of these things that we're talking about that also make your life better. Right? It's not just making sacrifices to make the climate better. It actually makes your life better to, eat more vegetables, to have a lower power bill, to be on a bicycle more than in a car. Those things are all going to make your life better. And just like regenerative farming, building soil carbon makes your plants grow better, makes you better at your job. It makes, and I think that's, a huge takeaway from this for me.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah.
Are you aware of programs where you can buy or donate for carbon offsets? Because there's a lot of talk about that at the end of the climate calculator.
Yeah, and that's the one complaint I have about the Cool Climate Calculator is that they emphasize offsets in a way that I don't think is accurate or appropriate, because what the research shows is that about 93% of the carbon offset projects that have been done have not, unfortunately, led to measurable reductions. And the bottom line is that we have to get to zero emissions. That's going to be really, really, really tough. And any emissions that remain are going to have to be physically removed from the atmosphere with technology that doesn't exist at scale yet and may never be possible. It's essentially running the entire industrial revolution backwards. Yeah. It's not a small thing to do. So we cannot count on it working. So that's why I think the offset concept has really passed its time. And this idea of net zero, where, yes, if you think of the climate like a bathtub, the atmosphere like a bathtub, you have water coming in through the tap. That's our climate pollution from burning fossil fuels and disturbing nature. We have a drain, which is land and ocean that are taking up some of that carbon naturally. And today we have natural ecosystem services that are removing about half the carbon that humans add to the atmosphere. But what we need to do is turn off the tap completely and also try to widen the drain to enhance natural sinks, to restore wetlands and forests, to have better agricultural practices. But it's just not going to be possible to keep the tap on and not have the tub overfill.
Right.
Great analogy.
Yep.
Have you heard some totally crazy shit where people have said this is this crazy invention where we're gonna remove carbon and we have these big machines that, have you sat at lectures or been in meetings where people have actually brought that kind of stuff up and said this might be a possible solution?
People
deep sigh before that answer.
Serious people are talking about crazy shit. Yeah. Like the discourse has gotten actually crazy because we're not doing enough of turning off the tap, of leaving fossil fuels in the ground, of making this fast and fair transition to clean energy and reducing overconsumption. That's what we have to do. There's just no way around it. But people are still really focused, and it would be great if we're able to also remove carbon and reverse some of the harm that's already been done. Yeah. But it definitely will not work at a large scale. Basically, if you think about planting trees, humanity has cut down about half of the trees on Earth. So if we're planting trees now, we're making up for past deforestation. We're not offsetting continued harm. When you're in a hole, the first rule is stop digging. Yeah. So I do hear really crazy things that I think are counterproductive and dangerous if they're overhyped, because people, and there's studies showing that over-reliance on techno-salvation actually paralyzes action. If people feel like, the engineers have got this, we'll just, invent our way out of it. Yeah. It's not my responsibility. Yeah. And the thing is, we all have to take responsibility for what we can. Some of that is holding fossil fuel companies to account. Some of that is holding politicians to account. Some of that is doing what we can personally and professionally and actually putting it into practice. I think the craziest thing that honestly scares me the most is this idea of solar geoengineering. And that's the idea of trying to inject tiny particles in the atmosphere that would hopefully, theoretically, reflect incoming sunlight. Right. So it'd be a way to reduce temperature.
Fuck.
Yeah. This is a thing. Yeah. This is
Sam,
a thing.
You got to remember that there's someone that will sell this shit to you. So that's where this kind of stuff gets crazy, is because just cutting back on things in your life doesn't make anyone any money. But when you can come up with some sort of invention or way of
microscopic fish scales to
then and you can sell that to someone, then that becomes very exciting.
And then have an IPO. Right. And then
but it's a carbon neutral IPO, right?
And then
for every stock you sell, you plant a tree.
Right.
But the thing that's really scary about this is not like a fringe, startup. This is governments. Yeah. This is like a serious, but like the National Academies of Sciences, so top scientists in the U.S. have written a report about this now, and because climate action is going too slow, and people argue there may come a point where the the harm from doing that might be less than the harm from uncontrolled catastrophic climate change. And I mean, there's so many problems with this. Like, it's so much better to get to the root of a problem and actually prevent it. I mean, think about health. I think about anything in our lives. Trying to clean up a mess is just always going to be so much more expensive, so much more risky, less effective than if preventing it in the first place. And another problem is that this would actually do nothing to the fundamental problem. So burning fossil fuels releases carbon, some of that, and about a quarter of it ends up in the oceans. So the oceans are acidifying, and this is a big problem for the abalones, which I love and grew up collecting in Walla, where I went with my family. All marine life, basically, that forms shells is like Elizabeth Colbert, the journalist, describes it as trying to build a house where someone keeps stealing your bricks. It basically gets harder to make these carbonate shells for these little critters in the oceans. And geoengineering, solar geoengineering, we do nothing about this, right? It's not affecting the root problem. It would also be a permanent commitment to global screwing with the atmosphere and the climate. Because if you ever stop, there'll be it's called termination shock, an enormous rocketing up over a very short couple years of temperature. So a much more difficult and stressful experience to try to adapt to. So it's a really, really, really bad and crazy idea. And it would be way better to burn stuff that doesn't kill us, or to stop burning the stuff that kills us. There are about 7-8 million people a year who die from burning fossil fuels.
I always wonder what they do in those experiments up in space. We send rockets. We used to send the shuttle up there, and they'd always send scientists, and they have all these different experiments that they do. I wonder if that was one of them, where they're like taking crushed up diamond dust and sprinkle it in the atmosphere. Let's see what happens.
I don't think NASA has done this. So this hasn't been a space thing. There was solar geoengineering is under discussion, and there was a trial planned actually in Sweden a couple years ago that was actually canceled because of protests. So it hasn't been tested experimentally yet. But the scary thing is that it's possible for like a rogue state to do it. I mean, a billionaire or a rogue state could actually do it.
Elon Musk.
So let's not do that.
Got the tools.
Yeah. Scary sounding.
Right.
Let's talk, wine. How do you be a climate wine consumer?
Yeah.
Let's bring it back to wine and away
back
from
to
Elon
wine.
Musk. It would be emerald mine dust, probably, if it was
God.
Elon, not diamonds, because that's where it all comes from, really.
Yeah.
Be a climate wine buyer. How do you be a climate wine buyer?
So we talked about packaging being important for producers, because on scale that makes a big difference. For consumers, I mean, I do choose lighter packaging. However, it's, again, much more important to skip one flight and get whatever wine you want. You can drink 1,250 bottles of wine for the same carbon footprint as a round-trip flight.
Holy shit.
Yeah. That's a lot even for this table.
1,250?
Yeah. There you go.
Excellent.
Yeah. It's at least a couple of weeks
That's
where
like
they're at.
Cancel your flights. Don't come out and visit us. Just order 1,000 cases of wine from winery16600.com.
It's only 100 cases. It's only 100 cases. That's all we ask.
We love you, but we don't need to see you.
But actually, that is a huge one. Figuring out how to do better virtual visits, for example, and having less physical tourism from really far away would be huge.
We didn't want to do Zoom.
Right.
Well, no, the carbon footprint's on me, because I'm here now because I'm visiting my family on my annual trip, and then I'm staying for a couple months to work at Stanford. So I've made a long trip to be here, and I'm glad we could meet in person. You did not induce me to take this. I take full responsibility for.
I just fly around the world for an hour and a half podcast. It's no big deal. I planted trees before I went. It's no big deal.
I'm not sure you've been listening, Sam.
I haven't had a steak in years. Oh, wow. This is a lot to consume. A lot to consume.
Can I ask you a question? Basically, we've spent an hour and a half unloading our climate mental states on you, and you spend your entire life in this stuff.
Yeah.
How do you cope? How do you what are your how do you protect your own sanity and spirit and all of this?
Yeah. Thank you for caring about me. I appreciate that question. I'm thinking about it a lot because it is a lot to cope with. I'm thinking about investing in and protecting and enhancing my health. And part of that is setting boundaries, I think, and focusing my energy where I can make a difference, and being able or willing to say no to things that I can't do. And I'm working on that and trying to get better. I am thinking a lot about my own health, my physical and mental well-being. So trying to enjoy movement and being active, healthy food, getting enough sleep. I mean, the stuff your mom tells you, but it is actually important and does really affect you. Time in nature is big for me, getting outside, really appreciating being here and, having longer days and better weather, and getting out for a walk this morning with my sister and her dog, which was really lovely. So doing stuff too, and recognizing that I need to do these things to take care of myself. Taking breaks. I mean, I'm technically still on vacation. I made an exception for you. But I'm on like a 3-week hiatus from social media, even reading media in general. I'm reading a novel right now, like just spending time playing cards with my dad and going on walks and like really taking a break. I had a really good piece of advice from Elaine Chicken Brown. We had coffee the other day.
The Haka Waka Waka.
Who scooped us on this podcast? I was only a little mad with her. Well, she one of the last Elaine contributions to Jancis Robinson obviously was a podcast that they launched, that they dropped with you yesterday. So there's lots you can get. Lots. I'm sure. We've talked about different things than all the smart people that were on that one. But you can the more the better for sure. I was joking with that, but we're on the same stuff that Jancis Robinson's on, Bart. We're doing something right.
And Elaine's going to be on the show at the end of the month.
Oh, wonderful.
She is? Yeah.
Oh,
she's coming back.
We didn't get the advice.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. So, Elaine, I hope I'm not revealing Elaine's secret here, but what Elaine advised me, which I found so helpful, I'm going to try to put into practice, was when they're considering what opportunities to take, Elaine's considering 2 things. 1, can I contribute? Will I make a valuable contribution here? And 2, will I grow as a person? Will I learn from this and build relationships that I want to invest in? And I think I felt a little bit at the end of last year like I was a bit depleted, like I'd been giving a lot, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't learning and growing as much myself personally. So I think that's also part of my plan going forward, is trying to be a bit more intentional in how I'm spending my time and do the things both that I enjoy. I mean, the sweet spot for climate is the things that you like doing, think are fun, and that the world needs and that you're good at. So figuring out how to direct that towards climate action and making sure I maybe need to be having a little more fun and, doing new things that I'm learning from, and not which I really value in these kind of conversations, because then I get fresh perspectives and I'm learning something. So thank you for giving me that.
And, enjoy this bottle of Chenin Blanc, because you probably haven't had a lot of Chenin Blanc lately. So as a new experience and a growing experience for you. How about that?
You make Chenin Blanc?
You know what? I got to get a word in edgewise with, the 2 16600 stereos in my ear.
This looks really beautiful. Thank you.
And what are you going to be doing? You're home, and then you said you're going to go hang out at Stanford for a couple months?
Hanging out.
Pretty much. They've been very flexible. So I don't have a really set deliverable there. I mean, I have.
Perfect.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't be admitting this.
That's pretty much been all of my experiences at Stanford. Also, I didn't do much. I didn't really
just show up. I think they're giving me an office. I've rented a garage there. Housing prices are absolutely astronomical. So I'm paying 50% more than I do in Sweden for 5 times less space. It should be fun.
That's
rough. Welcome to California.
Yeah.
You rented a garage.
It's been renovated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There
it
you
has
go.
a toilet now and a sink, and
There you go.
But 220
Shower?
square feet. Me and my husband. Yes, it has a
Good.
shower.
Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, I think it's all we need. And what I will be doing there is they've started this new school of climate and sustainability recently. It's September last year, so a couple months ago, and it's just getting off the ground. And they're looking for collaborations, new ideas. There are a lot of wonderful people there doing super interesting stuff. I think California is so important, as we were discussing earlier. It's often a leader in the U.S. and even globally in climate action. And I'm really interested in basically bringing the research to bear on informing decisions and inspiring action. So I think there's a lot of people there who are in the same place, and hopefully we can develop stuff together. One thing I'm working on is a personalized climate action guide, kind of a choose your own adventure to help people like you identify their highest impact actions and start putting them into practice. So that's something I got a bit of funding to do starting last year and is just getting underway. So hopefully I can get input on that here.
The next time you're in town, can we have you back on?
Please.
Next year.
Please, yes.
Or maybe in 2 months when she comes to have a very fun wine tasting experience at many places in Sonoma.
Well, Sam, I was going to say she has no real agenda at Stanford. She's going to be hanging out with these people, trying to make positive changes on the planet. Why not? If you guys are having some sort of party or dinner, can we send you guys some wine, or can we drop off wine, or can you take wine for that?
I don't know.
We'll put it on the ferry.
I accept. Yes. You've twisted my arm.
I mean, wow.
We'll carry it
Sounds
down
amazing.
on an e-bike.
Right.
I'm leaving Friday, so you could load the ship now, or maybe I'll be able to bring people up.
What is life in Sweden like? Is there more discussion about this in Sweden? I guess in my mind, everyone's a little more awake than we are here in the United States.
Yeah.
Is it spoken of?
Yes, I think climate is more part of everyday conversations there than it is here. Although I'm in different bubbles there and here, so I don't want to draw too much of my own experience, but I think the data back that up. I think one big difference is media. I mean, the U.S. media is doing a better job and for connecting the dots. So, for example,
They are, really?
Yeah, they are. They are. It has gotten better. I mean, there's something called the Society for Environmental Journalists who do really good work. There's a nonprofit called Climate Outreach, which focuses on effective climate communication and tested principles of what works to engage people effectively. I mentioned the Yale Center for Climate Communication does really good stuff. So it is getting better, but I think here in the US, but I do think that in Sweden and for a longer time there, it's just been more integrated. So for example, there was a newspaper near me that had an issue where everything was about climate. So all the stories, finance, sports, fashion, politics, everything was told through a climate lens or had a climate perspective. And I think that we really need to go in that direction to not make, this kind of, we need strong climate reporters with deep expertise, but we also need to, in the spirit of making all jobs a climate job, make everybody feel empowered and responsible and have the opportunity to talk about climate and connect those dots in their line of work. So if you're a finance reporter or, if you're writing about different topics, that you can actually include that angle and make it meaningful for your readers.
Yeah.
Every podcast is a climate podcast.
Yes, love it.
I mean, to some extent, yeah. And I think,
well, and it's one of those. It's the difference between thinking you're not racist and being anti-racist, right? If you're not actually doing something, you're doing something by not doing something, right? If you're not actively talking about this or like trying to find all these incremental ways in your life, well, then you're actively contributing more carbon than you should.
Right.
If you're not on, every podcast, whether it's a wine podcast or what, trying to find ways to bring this into the conversation, well, then you're actively not talking about it and pushing it further, to the back burner. So.
Right. Yeah. It's good. It's good.
Amen.
All right.
What a fascinating conversation. Thank you so very, very much. It's very appreciated. And I'm sure all of our listeners will appreciate it.
All around the country and in
30 different countries.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Well, what a great way to reach people in a low carbon way and build this community and get these words out. Love it.
That's what we thought of. That's why we were doing
That's why you're doing it. Got it. Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for setting a very high bar for the children of Norbaum Road. Totally don't resent it at all.
Thank you.
Maybe you guys can share a car on the way back up.
Yeah. I got dropped off. I got a ride, and my husband's walking down to meet me now.
Find a big white truck that's heading up the hill and grab on the back and drop you off.
Jump on
road.
The bumper.
There's a lot of us.
I got a quick shout out So you guys, I found out yesterday and today we have 2 new members of our chef cycle team. Mr. Sam Katuri has officially thrown or is climbing on the bike.
I paid $100
and gonna do chef cycle.
Yep.
And James Joyner, I just got an email. James also joined. So
Team Vomit.
our team Vomit is growing quickly. Sam, I'm excited for you.
Chef Cycle is?
So Chef Cycle is No Kid Hungry is the charity, and every year, the first year I did it, there were 300 chefs from all over the country that came to Sonoma and rode 100 miles 3 days in a row.
Wow.
And it's all in name of raising money to feed kids.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
that first year we raised almost $2 million.
Wow, congrats.
And it goes directly to feeding kids. So this year we formed a little team. There's a couple local chefs, and Sam's jumped in. So it's awesome.
For the record, there's a new route where you can do 2 days of 100 kilometers each day, which sounds way more.
But that doesn't matter.
I'm going to be racing Dusky Estes for who's going to be DFL.
Who gets the police
the police escort at the end because you're bringing up the caboose.
The great thing about it is, Sam, is everybody's standing there waiting for you.
Well, that's all I really want anyway in life.
because we don't eat until the last person's in.
I closed out a marathon course in France where they have very rigorous time limits, and I had to argue in my 200-word vocabulary of French that they had to let us keep doing it. So I've been the last person on a course, and it was still an awesome experience.
I'm looking forward to it.
I did. I used to do a mountain bike race up in Annandale, and we were in this one section, and I could hear this guy behind me for like miles. And I said, "This is a good place to go around me. Just go around." He goes, "No." He goes, "I'm good." I said, "No, please go around me." He goes, "No, I'm the sweeper." Oh. And I was like, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "I'm the sweeper." And I go, "Okay, take my number and go around me." So I've been there.
You've been swept.
I've been swept.
Bart, do I dare ask the Team Vomit how you got that name?
So that is a nod to the old Benziger ski trip that was an all guys trip for 22 or 23 years, just a one-day ski trip. Valley of the Moon intense training.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
That's great.
I want to jump in because I didn't know if you guys were going to do it or not. For
you want
real.
to get on the bike also?
Totally.
Oh, wow.
And I'm volunteering because I know he wants to do it. Jared Reeves, the executive chef at the Fairmont, he didn't think he could get a team together there. He was wondering if we were forming a team and he wanted to join.
Okay.
So,
awesome.
Cool.
More people for me to be behind. I love
Right?
it.
Great cause.
Well, and think about like the fundraising event we can have with wines, food.
It'll be antithetical to training for a 100-mile bike ride, but yes, we'll have a good time.
You know what? At this French marathon, the night before, so they sent all the instructions were in French, and their training diet was heavily cheese-based. So it was like a very serious analysis of which cheeses should you be eating at which stage in your marathon training.
Yeah,
and
totally. But in 1 ounce daily servings.
Yeah. I don't know if they got that, but you're right. That's the climate view. Yes,
I have a big thumb.
Yeah, yeah. And then the night before at the pre-party, there was a table of Kenyan runners who were world-class athletes and taking it very seriously, and we're going to run like a 2 hour or something ridiculous. But then the normal humans were all drinking tons of wine, which like is not the vibe in the US. So it's like, wow, okay, this is a different, but they still, all the Laurents who had these super short shorts still completely kicked my ass on the course.
But remember athletes, now going back and watching these sort of things on ESPN where you see basketball players or it's baseball players talking about how people were like smoking in the dugout or in the locker room.
It opens up your lungs and makes it so
we just always think of athletes as being, on this bike hooked up to electrodes trying to get maximum performance. But, there's a great history of people that were just everyday people that happen to have skills and still didn't drop their vices, Sam.
I mean, the Tour de France, there's pictures of the Tour de France that aren't that old of smoking, and riding.
Oh, wow.
That picture that I post, that's a guy, pouring a bottle of Chianti into a glass while he's racing,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was born for this.
Totally.
Amazing.
It's going to be awesome.
Right?
Good luck. Sounds like a really wonderful cause and fun team.
Can we also get a shout out and also a congratulations to you, Bart, and you, Sam. MJ Towler, our friend, the black wine guy, did his list. Was it 75? His top 75 wines of
the year.
2022. And Bart was not in. Both you guys were in the top 10. Barton, number 10, I believe, for the Rossi Ranch Grenache. And then Sam, number 8, for the Adutet Rossi Ranch
And
Grenache.
just a
And then-
bottle of Northern Rhone in the middle.
Yeah,
Whatever.
just a
Sandwich
bottle of some sort of Chevy, Jean Louis.
I didn't know GM made wine.
Right?
Chevy, right?
Yeah, Chevy. Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you.
And then shout out to MJ for being in Imbibe, the Imbibe magazine, and getting a little mention for being influential. So always
We knew him when?
Way back when.
Way back when.
I'm actually about to go record our DTC symposium keynote so that they have it a digital version ahead of what we're doing in a few weeks down there in Concord. So about to get on a Zoom and hang out with MJ and talk about the power of podcasts and selling wine.
we got a great month. Jasmine and I are going to be at Eco Farm,
That's
and
Now we're all going to be at Eco Farm.
I don't. It's possible we may all be at Eco Farm now that we have a hookup at Pebble Beach, and then our first Magnum dinner is going to be on the 26th of January, which Jared, the chef we spoke of, is putting together a menu for us. So it's going to
You
be
guys
fun.
remember,
okay.
I can carry bags. I can,
you
I
do
can
need a caddy.
transport
They
wine.
actually say you have to have a caddy.
Yeah. So there you
You
go.
can pour wine and hand us our cigarettes so we
Right.
can be our peak athletic performance.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks for taking time out to away from your family and to come hang out with us and
Drop some knowledge.
Yeah, we do
Appreciate it.
appreciate it, and hopefully we
you.
can get. We think of in California as being a little bit of a bubble here, but it is nice. We do have a lot of listeners around the country, and just to change a few minds and maybe change a few routines.
Little inspiration.
A little inspiration is always good. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy New Year.
Happy New Year.